The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Thank you very much. Welcome, colleagues, to this second part of the session, which will be presented by Professor Jonathan Jansen and Himla Sudyal, who will be reflecting on their scholarship journeys, highlighting the lessons they learned along the way. As we all know, an academic journey is shaped by different experiences, some positive and others negative. It can be exhausting and fun at the same time, depending on your institutional context, environment, and we spoke about that in a previous session, and as well as individual experiences. It would therefore be interesting to hear from these two professors about their journeys to become beacons in the field, as well as mentors, role models to many in academia. Before I introduce them, I just want to tell you a bit of a story as I said in the earlier session, I'm a beneficiary of programs such as this. My path and that of Professor Jansen crossed around 2000. I was in a doctoral program that was hosted by 5 universities, and on that day we were at the University of Cape Town. And Jonathan had just been appointed the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Pretoria, and he went around the country and also around the world looking for young Black South Africans who were doing PhDs. And in that particular program, as I responded to one of the questions, he asked, "Where are you? Where do you come from? What are you doing now?" And I said, "No, I'm in the process of finishing my PhD at Wits." And he said, "I want you to come and work with me next year." And indeed, in 2001, he appointed me at the University of Pretoria. And upon hearing that I've been recruited by the University of Pretoria, my institution where I was doing my PhD offered me a job as a lecturer. And then when they saw that I was determined to go to Pretoria, they offered me a senior lecturer. And because I understood what it meant to be a senior lecturer at that institution, I declined the offer. But one of the things that changed my mind in my decision to stay or to go, Jonathan said to me, "Chika, come and work with me. That institution is giving you a post. I want to give you a career. Come and work with me. I'm committed to your development." And that was a game changer, and it did not matter what position I was offered there, what money they were giving me. I was convinced and persuaded by this person who was interested in my future. And indeed, it did not disappoint. Upon finishing my PhD in 2002, within 3 months of my completing my PhD, I got a scholarship. I saw an advert that was advertising a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Illinois. I applied for it, and I was chosen as one of the 2 global scholars to participate in that program. Professor Jansen released me to go and participate in that program for 10 months and still keeping my post and paying my salary. I came back from the University of Illinois. Actually, during my stay there for 10 months, I came across 3 leading scholars in my field, 3 international leaders in my field. And when I came back and gave him that report, he was very excited. But on top of that, I came back with a book, which was published by Routledge. I turned my dissertation into a book. Those 3 international scholars, I am still in touch with them. And apart from the support which I got at home, I also had some support globally of people who were interested in my career. And one of them is currently appointed as an extraordinary professor in the Faculty of Education. As I'm speaking to you now, I'm currently sitting on the same chair and table which Jonathan sat at when he recruited me some 20 years ago. So it's a pleasure and honor for me to introduce Jonathan, who's been my mentor. Just to give you a brief background of Jonathan, he's a former VC of the University of the Free State, a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University, and the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He's a curriculum theorist, and his research is concerned with the politics of knowledge. His forthcoming books include The Decolonization of Knowledge, that will be published by Cambridge University Press, and Bewitched, a study of chronic dysfunction in a sample of South African universities. He leads a national study on the impact of the pandemic on the work and careers of women academics. He holds a PhD from Stanford University and is an A-rated scholar of the National Research Foundation. After him, we are going to have a second speaker under this theme, who is Professor Himla Sudel, who is the Executive Officer of the Academy of Sciences of South Africa, ASOF. She's a research professor in human genetics at the University of the Witwatersrand and was principal medical scientist at the National Health Laboratory Service previously. Prof. Sudel has done groundbreaking genetic research into the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa, in which her studies have identified some of the oldest DNA found in living people today, adding weight to the theory that modern humans evolved in the new era now known as Southern Africa. She was awarded the National Order of Mapungubwe Bronze by President Mbeki in September 2005 for her contribution to science. In 2005, she was appointed the Sub-Saharan Principal Investigator on Genographic Project, a 5-year worldwide project undertaken by the National Geographic Society to map humanity's migratory history. In 2017, she was rated as one of the top 10 most visible scientists in South Africa in the study by the Center for Research on Evaluation, Science and Technology, CREST, at Stellenbosch University. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm handing you over to Professor Jansen. After him, Professor Himla will take over and they will share the next 1.5 hours between themselves. Over to you, Professor Jansen.
What a privilege to be with you. First of all, congratulations to all of the scholars selected for this phase 2 of the Future Professors program. I know for a fact that this is a very competitive process and that you are here because the selection panel saw something extraordinary in you and about you. And so congratulations. Himla should really have spoken before me because as a geneticist, she will tell you about your origins, a human geneticist. I will tell you about your future. But be that as it may, it is an enormous honor. I had prepared a bunch of slides, but I'm not going to use it. So because I decided about 2 minutes ago, I'm going to change to actually talk about what Chika said I was supposed to talk about, which is an academic journey. So I'm going to keep it very informal and say to my colleague, Tanya, if you want to get on with other work, please feel free to do so and not flip my slides. So I'm just going to talk to you informally about my academic journey. And then as I do that, to point out or underline at least some of the lessons learned. Chika, I wonder if you could put off your mic and then I wouldn't have that back. Thank you so much. Okay, so I was born in Montague in the rural Western Cape, grew up on the Cape Flats, went to school there, and then finished school. Now, I wasn't very good for the first half of my schooling career. In fact, I'm moving house and a report card from Standard 2 fell out of a box last week. And I was quite disappointed to see that, according to that report card, I was 21st in the class out of 28 kids. And the teachers, the comments on the report card said, his writing needs improvement. So, I thought the purpose of schooling was to play soccer, not to do any serious thinking. But of course, I didn't think very much of myself. I didn't think that I could achieve anything. And that came much later in high school, in junior high school, when a Latin teacher of mine called me a aside during an interval when we were playing soccer and said to me, you pretend you know nothing, and but actually you're very smart and you have potential. Now that changed my life immediately, because nobody had told me that I could do anything. And since that day, I don't think I ever came second in a class again, or other than first in the class through the end of matric. But now, of course, your horizons as a child of working class parents, your horizons are very much shaped by what you see around you. So nobody in the immediate community went to university. I didn't even know what that was. My parents did what was called in the old days JC, Junior Certificate, and that's when they finished school, which was quite a thing those days. But that was what today is called grade 10. And so, I didn't have a sense of what a university was, let alone the need to study beyond grade standard 10, as we called it. Except that I had a friend in church who did go to university, was the first, is now a professor at UP. And we were very good soccer buddies and so on. And he said to me, I'm going to university. And I said, what do people do at the university? He said, they study. I said, but I just finished studying. Why must I continue studying? And then I just went and wanted to go to UCT because it was closer. I thought, if I'm going to go to university, I'll take one that gets me there in 10, 15 minutes on the train. Except I discovered that, I wasn't going to make it there despite my first class pass, which was apparently the first time at my high school. So that ticked me off a little bit, and then I took a bus, a train, a thumb, to Belleville, and registered for a BSc degree. And I remember the first thing a professor told me there is, you can't spell the word physiology. No welcome, no nothing, and so on. And that was probably 4 of the worst years of my life, because not only were the lecturers, especially in chemistry, incredibly racist, but it was also 1976, 77. And that, of course, was the time of uprising and so on and so forth. And so I failed chemistry twice, and was extremely angry because I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. Anyway, as time went on, I finished the degree, went into teaching, and enjoyed it enormously in a rural school on the West Coast. And then came back to teach in District 6 at a school that still stands, thankfully, today, called Trafalgar High School. So I was a biology teacher. And, after about 4 or 5 years of teaching the life cycle of the firm, you realize there's nothing else to say. No matter how, interesting you try to make it. And around that time, I learned from another friend about the Bishop Tutu scholarship that he offered for Black South Africans to study in the US, and I applied and then got into Cornell. Got a very long story short, I got to Cornell, and I wanted to study with the man who invented concept mapping in science education, Joe Novak, and I went to his office very, very nervous. And he opened his door and he said to me, "Are you the man from Africa?" And I knew at that point I should not tell him that Africa is not a country. I just said, let me just soak up the moment of being in the presence of Joe Novak, and I'll never forget what happened next. This is the second point of turning. So from the Latin teacher, here's the second point. He says, Mr. Johnson, we just wait here a second. And he turned around in a very small office and came back with a manuscript. And he says, this manuscript should have been with Harvard University Press a few weeks ago, but I was waiting for you so that you could give me comments. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the first time I wet myself in public. What the hell? How do I comment on something I don't even understand, on words I saw for the first time, like epistemology? And I said to myself, oh my Lord, he made a mistake. And so I went back to my small student apartment, and man, I tell you, I sweated blood. What am I going to write or type on this typewriter that I have just been given? And so on. So I must have written a complete nonsense and sent back my 2 pages of feedback to Professor Novak, and he thanked me for it and so on. Then it hit me. It wasn't only that he wanted my comments. He wanted to give me a message that I had never heard in South Africa, never heard at high school except through that one teacher, never heard at university at all. In fact, what I heard at university is what a lot of you heard at university, something like this. Welcome to Biochemistry 359. By the end of the first semester, half of you will be gone. How can you tell people they'll be gone before they began? But that is our academic culture in so many of our universities, so many of our faculties and departments. It doesn't expect. What Joe Novak was doing was the exact opposite. He's saying to me, as a young kid, who started a career as a teacher, that he expected me to have something to say about his manuscript. And that was absolutely life-changing for me. And when I write my Thursday column in the Times, or I go on radio and television, and I speak about the low standard of the exams, the 30 and 40% pass rates in certain subjects, it's not because I want to be difficult. It's because I know we have institutionalized low expectations in South Africa, so much so that really, really talented young people, whether in school or university, simply miss, not because they're smart, not because they're not smart, but because the expectation from the institutions is very, very low. And for both my Latin teacher and for both my, my Cornell professor, that was life-changing. And ladies and gentlemen, if I'm going to share anything with you today, it is this. You are actually much smarter than you think. I know when you get that rejection from the journal of your article, I know you're devastated. I know when that first promotion didn't go through, you're devastated. But actually, it's nothing, okay? Because you have this enormous talent that if recognized, if supported, if nurtured, will make many of you even greater scholars than you are at the moment. Take that from me. It is the one thing that I will preach. Somebody says preach it here, that I will preach till the day I die. And that is that we underestimate the capacity of it. I mean, just this week, I don't know if some of you saw this on Twitter, that student unions around the country are angry with NSFAS, because NSFAS now requires you to pass 75% of your modules, 3/4 of your modules. You can fail a quarter of them, pass 75% for continued state funding. The students want the old model, which is you pass half and we will give you a bursary. What the bloody hell? What has happened to our country? Okay, that there's nothing wrong with these young people. Let me just tell you this while it's on my mind. Before the lockdown, before COVID, I taught at 2 high schools every year for a short stint. The one is Oscar Mpeta High School in Nyanga in Cape Town. And the other is probably the wealthiest school I've ever seen on the planet. And it's a school in Palo Alto, California, where my old university is, called Castanea High School for Girls. Just to give you a sense of who goes there, Steve Jobs' daughter, for example, was there in one of the years that I taught the global module. I want to tell you something that is really important now. You know, when I teach those kids, and I've recruited some of them, and I was University Vice Chancellor, and they graduated. One of them is a Mandela Rhodes Scholar and that kind of thing. When I teach at Oscar Mpeta and I teach at Castanea, there is absolutely no difference between the students in those two. Absolutely no difference. The only difference is the structure of opportunity. In other words, the kids at Castanea obviously have much more opportunity to perform, opportunities for learning, opportunities for travel, opportunities for laboratory work, etc., than the students at Oscar Mpeta can ever dream about. What's the point here? There's nothing wrong with the children. There is nothing wrong with our undergraduate students. The big big problem is we don't expect them to do well. That was the big lesson. Then, to my surprise, I was told I did well at Cornell. I didn't expect that. I wanted to go back and teach in South Africa. And then my supervisor said to me, you know, we would like to offer you a PhD, funding for a PhD. But by this and that, I fell on my back. I said, oh my word, I can be a doctor one day. And then, of course, I thought about it. I said, well, if he thinks I can do it, let me apply elsewhere. So I applied to my first choice, which was University of Wisconsin, Madison, to work with Michael Apple. Second choice was Stanford. Third choice was Harvard. Each place I knew a professor that I wanted to work with. And Stanford called Martin Carnoy, who would become a supervisor, and he said, you know what? We want you here. We looked at your transcript. We're giving you, we will pay for everything. We'll even pay for your family while you're here. And so obviously off to California. And then the big second lesson that I learned. I used to leave at about 4 or 5 o'clock, leave campus and go back to my apartment. But I noticed something strange, that every time I walked past the office of Professor Carnoy, he was always there. He put out about 2 or 3 books a year at that time. And that shocked me. So one night, 7 o'clock, he's still there. 8 o'clock, he's still there. And I thought, this is really strange, because not only was he there, but Ellen Nachteri, the secretary, was also there. So you have this older woman sitting there, but she wouldn't leave before Martin left, etc. That hit me big time. That one of the most important differences between South African academics, I'm generalizing, but bear with me here for the point, and academics in that country where I studied, is the work ethic. South African academics are basically lazy. We get away with murder. We want to do as little as possible. This doesn't, of course, account for you or account for the many others who really do work hard. When I was at the University of Pretoria as dean, and Chika very kindly referred to that period, one night I went home and about 7 o'clock, and there's a huge building where most of the staff are located, housed, called the Aldo Gebou. And I looked up, and it was dark already in the winter, and I looked at the Aldo Gebou, and I could see 4 office lights that were on. So I went into this building, and I knocked on each door. And guess what? Who were the 4 people who were there at 7 o'clock at night? It was people like, well, I won't mention the names, but Subucha Lupu was one of them. Each of them had done their PhDs in another country, not in South Africa. In other words, they had learned what it meant to work hard, whereas my colleagues, both those incorporated from the college whom we selected and those who were always there, thought that you go home at 3 o'clock and take a swim and so on. Nothing wrong with that, but the work ethic, the publications rate at that point was so pathetic because there wasn't a work ethic. Okay, and so what are we going to do now about all of this? What did I learn? I learned that you need to make some very serious investments quickly. And you do that in 2 ways. You bring people in who have huge potential, people like Chika Seule. I see Everard Weber's on the line here too, and several others. And they change completely, both at the junior level and at the senior level. They change completely the work culture, the work ethic, the productivity, etc. in a university faculty and so on. And that was precisely what my team did at the University of the Free State. Ooh, I was called the son of many things when I got to the Free State, because I raised the standard for admissions and the standard for promotions. Why? Not because I want to be selective, but because I know that when you expect much from people, they will do so much more than you expect. So when we started this embryonic Future Professors program at Free State University, it was based on exactly the same principles that we base it on today. And that is what I just want to share with you as we move towards a close. I have no doubt that several of you will become outstanding in your disciplines. But I also know there's a lot of you who won't, unless the following happens. What are the attributes that I've learned on this journey about a professorial scholar? Not a lecturer, according to HR, not a researcher according to your dean, not an intellectual according to the broader society in which you work, but a professor, a scholar. The one is that you become a world authority in at least one thing. Not 10 things, not 2 things, but in at least one thing. And it's especially important because, especially for young Black scholars, you are pulled in all sorts of directions. I remember getting calls to speak on everything from teenage pregnancies in school to outcomes-based education to God knows what, that's fine if you want to contribute to bigger debates, but you're not going to get very far. And I wish I had this experience that you're having when I returned to the country in 91. Somebody who told me, zero in on one thing among the many things you do and become a world expert in that area. Okay, but you're not going to get anywhere, okay, if you are all over the place and not known as, as the expert in a particular area. Number 2, you have to have an ambitious spirit. You have to, especially when I worked at the Afrikaans universities, the former Afrikaans universities, people had this Calvinist sort of spirit, alle eer aan die Here, praise the Lord gets all the honor. And I agree with that, by the way, in a philosophical sense. But the Lord gave you a bloody brain, okay, and he gave you a body and energy, and he wants you, or she wants you, to be ambitious. And when you don't have that ambition to do more, when I come into South African University, I just had coffee with an academic this morning here in Stellenbosch. First thing academic I was how's Pirates doing? When I go to my old university, the first thing that I was is, what are you working on? In other words, there is an ambition to do more. You must have a passion for the subject, number 3. I mean, it must be something that gets you up. Somebody asked me the other day, do you still get excited about writing 2 or 3 books a year? Yes, there's puzzles that I sit with and that excite me and it propels me out of bed in the morning. My God, if that doesn't light your fire, then go sell car insurance, But I think it is for the scholar, this amazing opportunity to be paid to think. Just imagine that. We get paid to think. And this is, for me, such a passion, trying to figure out, why there was all this noise about decolonization and so little take up in the curriculum of universities. We developed theory around that. And as Chika mentioned, that should be out in the book soon. Or trying to figure out why universities like VUT, MUT, and others go through 2 or 3 administrators and nobody can solve the problem. What lies at the heart? In other words, to get to the bottom of things, as they say, is such a passion that is ignited. Number 4, to have a scholarly disposition. Now, South Africa is not a place for scholarly dispositions. We make up our minds before we think. We all have an opinion on everything from F.W. de Klerk, to Rassie Erasmus, take your pick of figures in the news. But you seldom have people sort of saying, I wonder what happened. I wonder why this man, de Klerk, would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in his public displays of, of certainty and uncertainty. And I wrote about that today in the Times. In other words, what's a scholarly disposition is one in which there's doubt. I remember at one university, I won't mention the name, somebody, Vice Chancellor, who said, our motto at this university is going to be based on hope and belief. And somebody got up and said, no. University is not a place to believe. A university is a place to doubt. And that, for me, is part of a scholarly disposition. You have to have a rich network of scholarly connections. That is why we built into the budgets of the FPPs in both phases a substantial amount of money for you to network and work with people around the world, and the best in your fields. I've often, interviewed or worked with people like Vilangevas and others, and trying to figure out how did these people become outstanding scholars, A-rated scientists, awards all over the world. And you know what the common denominator is? They worked in the laboratories and in the seminar rooms of some of the world's leading scholars. In Bilan's case, whom I just mentioned, his very first article is published with, a man called Sir Hans Krebs. Just imagine you as a postdoc, and your first serious article is with the Nobel laureate, Hans Krebs, who sort of figured out, the Krebs cycle, as you might know, in cellular respiration. My point simply is this, that if you did all your degrees at the same university, you are dead in the water. If all your degrees are from Wits, there's no hope for you. Okay, I don't mean that. What I mean is, it is very important for you in this program to launch yourself, which just signed off on a number of scholars to leave the country now that the borders are opened again, to be able to study with the best experts in their disciplines, wherever they might be found on the planet. If you don't have those scholarly connections, when Chika says there's still 3 people I work with today in higher education, and I know at least 2 of them, that's what makes you a great scholar. Not hanging out with the same bloody brothers from Poch and Wits and so on. You're going nowhere with your career. If your circle of intellectual influence and inspiration is the people around you. Number 6, you have to have a record of scholarly productivity. Each one of us can make excuses about why we're not productive. That's very, very easy. But unless you put out a first book that is different from the second book, that is different from the third book, and you go from local publishing to reasonable intellectual publishing house to the top publishing houses, unless there's a progression like that. I'm not talking about predatory journals. I'm not talking about these sort of shortcuts to disaster. I'm talking about knowing where you want to go, because you can put out as much articles and books as you want to, but they could all be low-level, repetitive nonsense. That's not going to do anything for your career. And so if you invite me back again, I'd love to talk about that issue, but how to build that scholarly productivity in such a way that people take you seriously. And finally, to have a learned capability for scholarly teaching. Too much of what we do is called delivery. Too much of what we do is called instruction. There is very little teaching that brings in the best of our research, that challenges students, that enables them not simply to fill out these stupid multiple choice questions, but to think deeply, to write essays, to contest ideas. By the way, one of the big issues in assessment at the moment is how to prevent students from cheating. I think people who have those debates in university management are at the wrong end of the chain. You will not have cheating if the scholarly teaching is of such a standard that you cannot regurgitate, that you cannot memorize, that you cannot simply give back the notes which you got, but because you have been stretched intellectually to think more broadly, to apply more rigorously, and to learn independently. That's a very different level of teaching. And so it's not just about research, it's also about research that feeds into quality teaching. So if you say to me, in conclusion, what on this academic journey is the single most important thing that you've learned? And it would be very simple. I didn't realize what capacity for greatness as a scholar lies in every single one of the people I've worked with, whether at school or at university. And that is why I'm so excited to be here today, because I know that all of you, if you want to, will achieve greatly, not just in the country, that's easy, but in the world. Thank you very much.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.